When someone you love does something kind for you, you want to believe it. You want to accept it without question. That's the mistake I made. My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite name. Cheerful. Too cheerful, maybe, but I told myself I was being a suspicious old man. She said she'd made an appointment for us, a father-daughter day at a medical wellness center downtown. The kind of place where they do comprehensive health screenings, she said. Blood panels, cardiac monitoring, nutrition consultations. She said she'd been worried about me since her mother passed. She said she just wanted to make sure I was taking care of myself. I believed her. I should tell you that right now, because everything that follows will make me sound foolish, and maybe I was. But she was my daughter. 29 years I'd watched her grow from a red-faced infant, who screamed at 2 in the morning, into a woman who wore silk blouses to work and called me every Sunday. You don't spend 29 years loving someone and then automatically suspect them when they offer to take you to a doctor's appointment. My wife had passed 8 months earlier. Lung cancer. 51 days from diagnosis to the end. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because it matters to what happened. When you lose someone after 34 years of marriage, you are not entirely yourself for a long time afterward. You make coffee for 2 people and then stand there in the kitchen, holding 2 cups and not knowing what to do with your hands. You keep reaching for the phone to tell her something funny you heard on the radio, and then you remember, and the remembering is its own kind of wound every single time. My daughter knew all of that. She had watched me rattle around the house for 8 months. She had come over on weekends and sat with me in the garden her mother had planted, and we had talked about nothing important, and it had been enough. I thought we understood each other. I thought we had the kind of relationship where honesty was assumed. I was wrong about that. But I didn't know it yet on the Wednesday morning when I showered and put on a button-down shirt and waited for her to pick me up. The wellness center was in a part of downtown I didn't know well. A newer building, glass front, the kind of place that smells like eucalyptus the moment you walk in. My daughter had her hand on my elbow as we went through the door, which I found slightly odd. I'm 63 years old. I teach 2 mornings a week at a community college. I walk 4 miles every other day. I do not need someone guiding me through a doorway. But I didn't say anything because I was trying not to be the kind of father who makes everything into a complaint. The reception desk was staffed by a young woman who looked up when we walked in and smiled. A professional smile, the kind that means nothing. My daughter approached the counter and said her name. The woman checked something on her screen and nodded. "We have you in room C for the initial consultation," she said. Then she looked at me and said, "And you must be Mr. Alderman." That was my name. Bernard Alderman. Nobody called me Mr. Alderman except students. "That's right," I said. My daughter said she needed to use the restroom and would be right back. She squeezed my arm and walked down the hallway to the left. I stood at the reception counter. The young woman was typing something. I looked around at the waiting area. A few chairs, a table with magazines, a rubber plant in the corner. There was a hallway to the right that I hadn't noticed, and at the far end of it I could see a door with a small placard on it that said private consultation. Then the receptionist leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She kept her expression exactly the same, neutral, pleasant. But she leaned maybe 6 inches closer to me and said very quietly, "Mr. Alderman, I need you to listen to me carefully. Whatever paperwork you're asked to sign today, don't sign it. Don't sign anything." I looked at her. She was looking directly at me, and her expression had changed. Underneath the professional pleasantness, there was something urgent. "I'm sorry?" I said. "There's a notary in room C," she said. "That's not standard for a wellness consultation. Please don't sign anything." And then she straightened up. Her face went smooth and professional again, and my daughter came back around the corner. I don't remember what I said when my daughter reappeared. Something ordinary. I know I was smiling because I remember the effort it took. We sat in the waiting area for about 5 minutes before a man in a dark blazer came out and introduced himself. He wasn't a doctor. He had the handshake of a financial advisor. Firm, practiced, slightly too long. He said his name was Mr. Forsyth, and that he was the center's client relations coordinator. He asked if I was ready, and gestured toward the hallway with room C at the end. I said I needed to use the restroom as well. My daughter looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. I told her I'd be right back, patted her hand, and walked in the direction of the men's room sign near the entrance. I did not go to the men's room. I went out the front door. I stood on the sidewalk in the February cold, with my heart going at a pace that had nothing to do with the walk. I called a car. I told the driver my address. I sat in the back seat the whole ride home with my hands flat on my knees, watching the city go past the window. And I didn't let myself think too hard about what I was starting to understand, because I needed to get home first. I needed to see what was in the house. My wife was a woman who wrote everything down. That sounds like a small thing to say about someone, but it was actually one of her defining qualities. She kept records. Notebooks organized by year in a filing cabinet in the second bedroom that we'd always called the study, even though neither of us studied much of anything in there after the kids grew up. She kept tax documents, medical records, correspondence with her sister out in Portland, notes she'd taken at her mother's estate settlement when her mother died in 2009. She had a system that made sense to her and that I had never had any particular reason to disturb. I went to that cabinet the moment I got home. The drawer that held the most recent years was at the top. I pulled it open and started going through the folders. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for. Some part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything at all, that the receptionist was confused or paranoid, or that I'd misunderstood something. Some part of me hoped I could go back downtown, apologize for disappearing, and sit through whatever presentation they had planned, and politely decline whatever service they were offering. I found it in a folder labeled Estate Planning. There were 2 sets of documents inside. The first set I recognized. My wife and I had both signed them years ago, a standard will prepared by the attorney who handled the sale of our first house. Everything split evenly between our daughter and our son. The house to be held jointly until mutually agreed upon sale. Standard, clear. The second set I had never seen before. It was a document prepared by a firm called Meridian Asset Partners. I had never heard of Meridian Asset Partners. The document was dated 14 months ago, 3 months before my wife's diagnosis, 7 months before she died. It proposed a restructured asset transfer that would consolidate the house, my wife's retirement accounts, and a portion of my own pension into a managed trust. The trustee named in the document was my daughter. The document had a place for 2 signatures at the bottom. My wife's signature was there, mine was not. I sat with that document for a long time. Outside, the garden my wife had planted was bare in the February light. She'd put in a Japanese maple the spring before she got sick, and it stood at the corner of the yard with its bare branches against the gray sky, and I looked at it for a while and tried to think clearly. My wife had signed a document restructuring our assets without telling me. 14 months ago. 14 months ago, we had driven to Vermont for a long weekend to see the fall foliage. We had stayed in a bed and breakfast run by a couple who kept 4 enormous dogs. We had eaten at a small restaurant where the food was unremarkable, and the wine was better than expected, and on the last morning we had sat on the porch with coffee and talked about whether we might move somewhere smaller when we both retired. It had been a good weekend. I had not been aware of any undercurrent, and yet I kept coming back to one possibility I did not want to consider, and then I kept setting it aside, and then I kept coming back to it. My wife had been a careful woman. She had been a woman who wrote things down. If she had signed that document, she had reasons. The question was whether she had been given accurate information about what she was signing. I called my son. He lives in Charlotte, 2 hours away. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always does when the call is from home. I told him I needed him to come up. He heard something in my voice because he didn't ask any questions. He just said he'd be there by evening. Then I called the attorney, not the one who had drafted the original will, who had retired, but the one his firm had passed us on to when he left. I got voicemail. I left a message that was probably longer and more disorganized than it needed to be. I said I had found documents I hadn't seen before, and that I wanted to understand my legal position. I said it was urgent. Then I sat back down and read the Meridian Asset Partners document 3 more times. The second time through, I noticed something I'd missed. There was a clause on page 4 that specified the conditions under which the trust could be dissolved. One of those conditions was the death of a co-signatory, meaning my wife. Under those conditions, the document described a process by which the trust assets could be liquidated with the approval of the trustee, my daughter, without requiring the approval of any other party, without requiring my approval. When my son arrived, I had made dinner, which surprised him. He came through the door expecting to find me sitting in the dark, and instead, I was in the kitchen making pasta, because I needed to do something with my hands. I showed him the documents. He read them at the kitchen table while I stood at the stove, not stirring anything that needed stirring. He was quiet for a long time. My son is the kind of person who processes things internally before speaking, which has always made him difficult to read, and which I had generally considered a virtue. When he put the papers down, he said, "How long have you had these?" "Found them this afternoon," I said. He asked me how I knew to look. I told him about the wellness center, about the receptionist, about what she'd said. I told him about the man in the blazer, and the door with the private consultation sign, and the notary that had no business being in a wellness center. I told him I had walked out without signing anything. He looked at me for a moment. "Good," he said. That was all he said. Then he picked up the documents again. We talked until midnight. My son had a level head about it, which was what I needed. He didn't collapse into emotion, and he didn't minimize it either. He laid it out the way he thinks through problems at work, systematically, and by the time we were done, we had a list of things we needed to do. Contact the attorney, find out everything we could about Meridian Asset Partners. Understand the legal standing of a document signed by only one of two parties to a joint estate, and figure out how my wife's signature had ended up on something without mine. That last item was the one that kept snagging. I didn't tell my son about the possibility I couldn't stop returning to, that my wife might not have fully understood what she was signing, that someone might have presented it to her as something different from what it was. I kept that to myself because I wasn't ready to say it out loud. The attorney called back the next morning. Her name was Audrey Pemberton, and she was methodical and unsentimental in a way I found steadying. She told me to bring everything in. When I got to her office and spread the Meridian documents on her desk, she read them without speaking, which took about 12 minutes. Then, she looked up and said several things that I want to be precise about, because they mattered. She said that the document was structured in a way she had seen before, typically used in what were sometimes called elder financial planning schemes. Not always illegal, but often operating in a gray area, and frequently predatory. The setup usually involved identifying a family with significant assets, a house, retirement accounts, life insurance, and then approaching a member of that family who had existing authority or influence over the person holding those assets. In this case, she said, your wife. She said the document would likely not be legally enforceable in its current form because it lacked my signature, and because my wife's signature on a joint asset document without my co-signature was almost certainly invalid. But she said that was not the same as saying the situation was uncomplicated. If my daughter had been working with Meridian as their point of contact, there might be other documents or representations made in my name that she hadn't seen yet. She would need to do a full title search and check for any recorded liens or transfers. She told me to change the locks. I did it that afternoon. My daughter came by 2 days later. I had not contacted her. I had not answered her calls, which came twice on the day I left the wellness center, and then once more the following morning before they stopped. I had spent those 2 days talking to Audrey, talking to my son, and not sleeping very well. When she knocked on the door, I let her in. I wasn't ready to not let her in. She was still my daughter. She looked at me with an expression that tried to be concerned and landed somewhere between concerned and wary. She said she'd worried when I disappeared from the wellness center. She said the man in the blazer, she called him a wellness consultant, had said I seemed disoriented. She said she thought maybe I was having some kind of episode. I let her finish. Then I put the Meridian Asset Partners documents on the table between us. She looked at them. Her face changed. It went through several expressions quickly, like a hand of cards being shuffled, and what it settled on was something I recognized from when she was 11 years old, and I had found the broken lamp she'd hidden behind the couch. It was the expression of someone deciding how much to admit. I can explain this, she said. I said, I'm listening. What came out over the next hour was not the explanation she'd promised. It was more like a series of rationalizations offered in rapid succession, each replacing the one before it when she could see it wasn't working. She said she'd been worried about the house going to probate. She said she'd been trying to protect the family assets. She said she hadn't known I'd be upset. She said she'd thought it was what her mother had wanted. That was the one that hit me hardest. Your mother wanted to sign away joint assets without telling me? I said. She looked at her hands. She was scared, my daughter said finally. She thought if something happened to her, you'd sell the house. She didn't want you to sell the house. I sat with that for a moment. She could have told me that, I said. She could have said those words out loud to me. I was her husband. We talked about everything. My daughter didn't answer. Did you tell her what she was signing? I asked. Still no answer. That silence told me more than any words would have. Audrey found two other things in the weeks that followed. The first was a recorded document attempting to establish a power of attorney, naming my daughter, that had been filed 6 months before my wife died. The filing was deficient. It hadn't been properly witnessed, and so it had no legal effect, but the attempt had been made. The second was correspondence between my daughter and a representative of Meridian Asset Partners dating back almost 2 years. The representative had a title that described him as a senior wealth transition advisor. The correspondence showed a relationship that had been going on since before my wife's illness, since before the diagnosis that none of us had seen coming. My daughter had not come to Meridian on her mother's behalf. Meridian had come to my daughter on their own behalf. Audrey said this was not unusual. She said that companies operating in this space sometimes use social media and public records to identify households with significant illiquid assets, houses, primarily, and then identified family members who might be susceptible to a pitch about protecting those assets. She said the pitch usually involved language about estate taxes, probate costs, family conflict. She said it was designed to create fear. And then, she said they offer a solution. The solution, she said, always involved transferring control of the assets to someone who trusted their judgment. In this case, my daughter. In the case of my daughter's judgment, a company she had come to trust, because they had spent a year building that trust. My daughter had not set out to steal from me. She had been convinced that she was helping. That distinction mattered, though I spent a long time deciding how much. Audrey filed an injunction that prevented any transfer or encumbrance of the property pending resolution. She referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office, which, it turned out, already had complaints on file against Meridian Asset Partners from two other families in the state. The senior wealth transition advisor lost his license. Meridian Asset Partners closed their local office within the year. I don't know exactly what happened to him after that. I didn't follow up. My daughter and I did not speak for 4 months. That was her choice more than mine, or maybe it was both our choices, mutually arrived at without discussion. I wasn't ready to talk, and I think she wasn't ready to hear what I might say, and so we both let the silence sit there and do its work. My son came up most weekends during those months. He didn't fill the silence with optimism or urge reconciliation. He brought his youngest with him sometimes, my granddaughter, who is 4 years old, and interested primarily in the Japanese maple in the corner of the garden, which she calls the red tree even though its leaves were still bare through most of the winter. She would stand at the kitchen window and point at it, and say things I couldn't always understand. The attorney who had handled my wife's mother's estate back in 2009, the original one, retired now, living in South Carolina, called me in March. I don't know how he heard about what had happened. People talk. He said he was sorry, and then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said that financial predators who work through families are particularly effective because they understand that love is the thing that makes people stop asking questions. The love is real, he said. They count on that. I thought about my daughter walking me through the door of that wellness center with her hand on my arm. The hand had been real. The care underneath it had been real in its way, even if it had been built on top of a structure of manipulation she hadn't been equipped to recognize. That didn't make it okay, but it was something I could hold alongside my anger without the anger disappearing. She called in April. We talked for 40 minutes, which was long enough. She told me she'd been seeing a therapist who specialized in financial exploitation, as a perpetrator more than a victim, she said, which was the honest framing. She said she understood that she had let someone convince her that what she was doing was right, and that she had stopped asking the questions she should have asked because the answers she was getting felt good. I wanted to be the one who had it figured out, she said. I wanted to be the person who had protected the family. I didn't look hard at what I was actually doing. I didn't say that was enough. I didn't say all was forgiven. I said I heard her, and that I needed more time, and that the door wasn't closed. That was the truth. All 3 parts of it. The house is still mine. The Japanese maple my wife put in bloomed red in April, which is the first spring it's really come in. It's a small tree still, maybe 8 feet, slender, but in the right light in the afternoon it's something. I find myself going out to look at it sometimes when I can't sleep, which is still often enough. I still teach Tuesday and Thursday mornings. My students are mostly in their 30s and 40s, people retraining for second careers, and I like them for exactly that reason. They're not there because someone told them to be. One of them asked me a few weeks ago, after class, if I was okay. I must have seemed somewhere else. I told her I was fine, which was approximately true. I go through the filing cabinet sometimes, not to look for anything in particular, just to be in the room with my wife's handwriting. The records she kept are not just records. They're a record of her, in a way. The way she organized, what she thought was worth preserving, the notes she made in margins. I found a note she'd written in the back of the 2019 folder, in pen, in her handwriting. Bernard, the maple goes in the southeast corner. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. She'd written that a year before she planted it. She must have been planning it in her head for a year. The maple is in the southeast corner. She knew what she was doing. I won't sell the house.